Assalamu alaikum. Good morning, dear students. Today's lecture is about body fluid compartments and the fluid balance in our body. The objectives of today's lecture are to explain the distribution of body water in various body fluid compartments, to understand the concepts of osmolarity, osmosis, and osmotic pressure, to list the concentration of some important solutes in the intracellular and extracellular compartments, and to explain how fluids move between the different compartments. And finally, to list the sources of water gain and loss and how each is regulated. Water in our body has several functions. Among these functions are the following examples. Water acts as a lubricant. It is also an important solvent for electrolytes and other constituents. It is the medium for transport of solutes. It is needed for cellular metabolism. It helps digestion and elimination, and it helps to maintain body temperature. The content of an individual remains constant over a period of time, and this is kept by homeostasis. The percentage of body water varies from person to person, and it is inversely related to the amount of the adipose tissue in the respective person. For example, because women they have more fat, so they have lower body water compared to men. The percentage of body water decreases progressively with age. So more water is present in the body of the baby, and as we progress with age, the body content of water decreases gradually. Different tissues have different water content. For example, the plasma contains more than 90% of water. Skin, muscle, and internal organs, they contain between 70 to 80% of water. Skeleton or bones, they have only 22% of water. And adipose tissue is the tissue that has the least amount of water, and it represents only 10% of the tissue mass. Water is by far the largest single component of the body, making up 55 to 80% of the total body mass, depending on age and gender. And here we can see that in female, the 55% of their mass is water, while in male, because they have less adipose tissue, 60% of their total body mass is water. Babies are more wet than adults because their body contains 80% water, composes about 80% of the total body mass of the babies. This water inside the body is distributed in different compartments. So if in this figure we can see the entire body, the body is covered by the skin, and it is separated by the skin from the external environment, and the body cavities are lined by epithelium to surround or to separate the lumen of the different hollow organs from the interior or internal environment of the body. This total body fluid is distributed in different compartments. So if we consider the blue part in this figure as the total water of the body that is present inside the organism, this water is, or the total body water is distributed between cells, and this water inside the cells is called intracellular fluid, and the other part of the fluid or water is present outside the cell, and we call this the extracellular fluid. I want to attract your attention that water or fluid present inside the different blood cells is part of the intracellular fluid, and any other fluid that is present outside the cells is considered as the extracellular fluid. The extracellular fluid is further subdivided into two subcompartments, and these two subcompartments are the plasma, the liquid part of the blood. I said in the previous lecture that blood is formed of cells and liquid part. The cells are of different types: red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets, and the fluid inside these cells is part of the intracellular fluid. But the liquid part, or the plasma of the blood, it is part of the extracellular fluid. And the rest of the extracellular fluid is present between the cells and outside the cardiovascular system, and this is called the interstitial fluid. So the fluid compartments of the body are all contained in either the intracellular compartment or the extracellular compartment. The intracellular fluid is all fluid contained inside cells, and it comprises two-thirds of the body fluid. So two-thirds of the total body water is present inside the cells. The remaining one-third is present outside the cells, and it is called the extracellular fluid. It is the fluid outside cells. One-third of all body fluid or total body water is contained in the extracellular compartment. Here we can see again a figure that shows that the body is composed of solid material and the water that comprises 55% of the total body mass in female and 60% of the total body mass in male. And this total body water, two-thirds of it is present inside the cells, and only one-third is present outside the cells, either as interstitial fluid or plasma. And as you notice that 80% of the extracellular fluid is present in the interstitium, and only 20% of the extracellular fluid is present inside the cardiovascular system, and these are the blood vessels as well as the heart. Different processes are responsible for the exchange of water and solutes among the three different compartments: the intracellular compartment, the interstitial fluid, and the plasma. These processes are filtration, reabsorption, diffusion, and osmosis, and we will cover them in more details in the coming slides. While the intracellular fluids or the intracellular fluids are all contained within a single space inside the cells, the extracellular fluid is found in a number of subcompartments. These are the interstitial fluid. Most of the extracellular fluid is found in the microscopic spaces between the cells of the body, and this represents about 80% of the extracellular fluid, as I said in the previous slide. The plasma or the intravascular fluid space, the remaining 20% of the extracellular fluid forms the liquid portion of the blood, and this is called the plasma. Other extracellular fluids that are grouped with the interstitial fluid include, as we said in the previous lecture, lymph, cerebrospinal fluid, the synovial fluid inside the synovial joints, the aqueous, humor, and vitreous body inside the eye, the endolymph and the perilymph that are present in the inner ear, and the pleural, pericardial, and peritoneal fluids that are present in the serosal sacs of the chest and the abdominal cavity. Here we can see in this table the different compartments of the body fluids and their volumes. If we take an average adult male with a body mass of 70 kilogram, 60% of his body mass will be water, and this represents about 42 liters. This 42 liters, 2/3 of this 42 liters are present inside the cells, and this represents the intracellular fluid, while 1/3 of the 42 liters is present in the extracellular fluid, and this represents 14 liters. And these 14 liters, 20% is present inside the blood vessels as plasma, and this represents 22.8 liters, and 80% of the 14 liters is present in the interstitial space, or the space between the cells, and this represents about 11.2 liters of the total body water. Different body fluid compartments have different ionic compositions. Here, if we look at the intracellular fluid and we take the skeletal muscles as an example, we can see that the main cation or positively charged ion present inside the cell is potassium, while the main anion that is present inside the cell is phosphate, and then protein anions come next. On the other hand, the extracellular fluid, either plasma or interstitial fluid, we can see that the main cation in both compartments is sodium, while the main anion is chloride. So please remember that potassium is the main positively charged ion inside the cell, and phosphate is the main negatively charged ion inside the cell. Outside the cell, either the plasma or interstitium or the interstitial fluid, both of them are extracellular fluids. The main positively charged ion is sodium, and the main negatively charged ion is chloride. So plasma and interstitial fluid composition is very similar, except for the plasma proteins. Inside the blood vessel, there are more proteins, or the protein concentration is higher than the protein concentration in the interstitium or the interstitial fluid. The extracellular fluid composition differs very much from that of the intracellular fluid, and all cells are permeable to water. Again, to attract your attention, that the main cation in the extracellular fluid is sodium, and the main anion is chloride, while the main cation in the intracellular fluid is potassium, and the main anions are phosphate and ionic proteins. The movement of water between the body fluid compartments, or the three compartments between the intracellular fluid, interstitial fluid, and then between interstitial fluid and plasma happens using different processes. So if we talk about the movement of water between the interstitial fluid and the intracellular fluid, this happens via osmosis. So the movement of water between the interstitial fluid and the intracellular fluid occurs by osmosis, while the movement of water between the plasma and the interstitial fluid across the capillary membrane happens by filtration, which is the movement of water from the plasma to the interstitium, and reabsorption, which is the movement of water in the opposite direction from the interstitial fluid back to the plasma. And these or these two processes, filtration and reabsorption, are governed by the capillary blood pressure and the colloid osmotic pressure, and we'll talk about them in more details in one of the coming slides. What is osmosis and what is osmotic pressure? Osmosis is the net diffusion of water across a selectively permeable membrane. All body cells are surrounded by phospholipid bilayer, and this phospholipid bilayer, or the plasma membrane or the cell membrane, is permeable to lipids or lipid-soluble molecules and impermeable to water-soluble molecules. So the cell membrane is a selectively permeable membrane. If we look at this figure here, we have a U-shaped tube. We have a left arm separated from the right arm by selectively permeable membrane. On the left side, we have pure water solution, and on the right side, we have a solution of a solute that appears here in orange color. So the water, or the concentration of water molecules on the left side, is more than the water concentration on the right side. This membrane does not allow the diffusion of the solute molecules because the pores are smaller than the size of the solute molecules. If we apply the concept of diffusion, diffusion is the movement of ions or molecules from area of high concentration to area of low concentration. So the area of high concentration is the left arm, and the area of low water concentration is the right arm. So water will move from the left side to the right side across the selectively permeable membrane, and this is osmosis. Water can pass through the plasma membrane in two ways. One of the ways is directly through the phospholipid bilayer by simple diffusion, because water molecules are very small. And we have another way by which water molecules can cross the phospholipid bilayer or the plasma membrane is through special water channels called aquaporins. We have different subtypes of aquaporins present in different body cells, and these aquaporins are just integral membrane proteins that have a central pore that is permeable to water. Okay, so osmosis is the net diffusion of water across a selectively permeable membrane. The ability of membrane, or the membrane, allows only water to move, so water will move from area of high concentration to area of low concentration. So we can see here that at equilibrium that the water on the right side is higher than water, or the level of water on the left arm, and this is the state of equilibrium. If I want to bring back the water level down and make it equal to the left arm, then I have to apply a pressure using a piston, and the pressure, or the amount of pressure that is required to bring the water level to the pre-equilibrium state, is called the osmotic pressure. So osmotic pressure is the pressure applied across a semi-permeable membrane to stop osmosis and keep the water level equal on both arms, or in both arms of the U-shaped tube. Okay, there is a concept called osmolarity. Let's talk about osmolarity, and let's differentiate between osmolarity, osmolality, and tonicity. First, normally cells neither shrink nor swell because intracellular and interstitial fluid have the same osmolarity. Although they have different ionic composition, but they have equal osmolarity, or same osmolarity. What is osmolarity? Osmolarity is defined as the number of osmoles of solute per liter of solution. Osmoles are the osmotically active particles that can attract water movement across a semi-permeable membrane or selectively permeable membrane. Osmolarity is proportional to the number of osmotic particles formed per molecule once the molecule dissolves in water. So osmolarity, which has a unit of osmoles per liter, is moles multiplied by the number of particles of that solute that will be released when it is dissolved. To make it simple, let's give some examples. For example, assuming complete dissociation of 1 mole of sodium chloride. The sodium chloride, when dissolved in water, each mole will give me 2 ions, sodium and chloride. So I have 2 osmolar solutions in 1 liter. Okay, so the osmolarity will be 2 osmoles per liter for each mole of sodium chloride. If I have another salt, which is calcium chloride, this 1 mole will give me 3 ions per molecule. So 1 mole of calcium chloride will give me a solution of 3 osmolar per liter. So osmolarity increases either by decreasing water to make the solution more concentrated, or increasing the amount of solute that is dissolved in water. Normal body value for osmolarity is between 285 to 295, so on average it is about 290 milliosmoles per liter. And the change in osmolarity of 2% will elicit physiological responses or will trigger homeostatic mechanism to bring back the osmolarity to the normal range. Physiological concentrations in our human body, we don't talk about osmoles per liter, we talk about milliosmoles per liter, which is 1 over 1000 of osmoles per liter. Now, what are the differences between osmolarity, and tonicity? Most of the time these 3 terms are a bit confusing to students, so let's make things simple here. Osmolarity, as we defined this term in the previous slide, is a measure of solute concentration per unit volume. So our unit was osmoles or milliosmoles per liter of solvent. Osmolarity is the measure of the solute concentration per mass of the solvent. So it is osmol or milliosmol per kilogram. So if you are talking about the concentration in a volume of the solvent, it is osmolarity. If you are talking about the concentration of the solute in a mass of solvent, then it is osmolarity. Tonicity is the measure of osmotic pressure gradient between 2 solutions. As we saw in the U-shaped tube, we have 2 solutions, one pure water on the left side and one containing solute on the right side. So there is an osmotic pressure gradient between the 2 arms of the U-shaped tube. Unlike osmolarity, tonicity is only influenced by solutes that cannot cross the semi-permeable membrane. And in the previous example, the solute that cannot cross the semi-permeable membrane was the triangularly or pyramid-shaped orange solute present in the right arm, because these are the only solutes that affect the osmotic pressure gradient. And if we remove that solute from the right arm, then we'll have equal osmotic pressure on both sides, and there is no gradient. So there will be no net movement of water by osmosis. The greater the concentration of a solute in a solution, or in other words, the greater the osmolarity of a solution, the greater will be the pulling force or the osmotic pressure of that solution. As we saw in the previous slides, although we have different ionic composition of the intracellular fluid and extracellular fluid, the osmolarity of both compartments is equal, and it is around 290 milliosmoles per liter. The normal serum or blood osmolarity, and also the normal interstitial fluid osmolarity, as well as the normal intracellular fluid osmolarity, is around 290 milliosmoles per liter. A solution that has higher osmolarity than the plasma is called hypertonic solution. So any solution, the plasma or the osmolarity of the plasma is the reference osmolarity. So if we want to compare the osmolarity of any solution to the biological system, we compared with that of the plasma. So if the osmolarity of any solution is higher than that of the plasma, we call this solution hypertonic solution. A solution that has a lower osmolarity compared to the plasma, it is called hypotonic solution. And a solution that has an equal osmolarity to the plasma or similar to the plasma, it is called isotonic solution. As I mentioned in one of the previous slides, that water moves or exchanged between the intracellular fluid and the interstitial fluid by osmosis, while water is exchanged between the plasma and the interstitial fluid by filtration and reabsorption. So let's talk about the exchange of water between intracellular and interstitial fluid by osmosis. If we place a cell in a solution that has an osmolarity similar to the intracellular fluid, or an isotonic solution, and sodium chloride solution that has a concentration of 0.9%, usually we call normal saline, and this is the commonly used fluid in hospitals. If we place a cell inside 0.9% of sodium chloride, the osmolarity of intracellular fluid is similar to the osmolarity of the normal saline, so there is no osmotic pressure gradient and there is no net movement of water, and this will cause no change in the shape of the cell. And if I place this cell in a solution that is hypertonic or has an osmolarity higher than the intracellular fluid, and seawater as an example, in this case the osmolarity of this fluid is much higher than the osmolarity of the intracellular fluid, and here the osmotic pressure gradient will favor the movement of water or net movement of water molecules from the cell to the solution, and this will lead to the shrinkage of the cell. On the other hand, if I place or we place the cell in hypotonic solution, or a solution that has an osmolarity lower than that of the intracellular fluid, and distilled water as an example, that contains no solutes, no ions. Now in this case the osmolarity of the intracellular fluid is higher than the osmolarity of the solution or the hypotonic solution, and in this case the osmotic pressure gradient will favor the movement of water from the solution into the cell, and this will cause the cell to swell, and if it is left like this, the cell might rupture. So why the above happened? Because water moves by osmosis between the intracellular fluid and the extracellular fluid, or in other words the interstitial fluid. So osmotic equilibrium is maintained rapidly between the intracellular fluid and the extracellular fluid, because we said that water can move freely across the plasma membrane, either directly through the phospholipid bilayer or across water channels. We call them aquaporins, and as I said, these are integral membrane proteins that have hydrophilic central pore that allows water to move between both sides of the plasma membrane of the cell. The other way of water exchange between plasma and interstitial fluid is filtration and reabsorption, and these processes are for the movement or exchange of water across a capillary membrane. As I said, water will move with its solutes from the plasma to the interstitial fluid in a process called filtration, and it moves back from the interstitial fluid to the plasma in a reverse process that is called reabsorption. So the exchange of water between the plasma and the interstitial fluid is determined by balance between the capillary hydrostatic pressure and colloid osmotic pressure. The osmotic pressure that is created by the plasma proteins, because we said we have more proteins in the plasma compared to the interstitium. And this is called the Starling equilibrium, and it will be studied in more details, inshallah, in the cardiovascular system. Here we can see that we have different forces that act on the capillary wall. Some forces will favor filtration and other forces will favor reabsorption. And as I said, these forces, we call them Starling forces, and we will cover them inshallah in the cardiovascular system. Now let's talk about water gain and water loss. Water gain is how our body gains water, or the different ways how our body gains water, and the water loss is how our body loses water. As we mentioned in the previous slides, osmolarity is identical in all body fluid compartments under steady state condition. Body water will redistribute itself as necessary to accomplish this, to keep homeostasis. And this redistribution happens by osmosis between the cell and the interstitium, and by filtration and reabsorption between the plasma and the interstitium. Body control systems regulate the ingestion or the intake of water and the excretion of water to maintain constant total body water. So to have an equilibrium, we should have equal, or we should have water intake or water gain equal to the water loss. If there is an imbalance, then we have a disease state. And the control systems also should maintain constant total body osmolarity. We shouldn't only keep the total body water constant, but also we need to keep the osmolarity constant, because change in osmolarity will affect many functions of the cell. The normal fluid intake is through the ingestion of liquids and moist food, and this accounts for about 2.3 liters per day. And also the metabolic synthesis of water during cellular respiration and dehydration synthesis, and this accounts for 200 ml per day. We know that cellular respiration will produce water as a byproduct. Normal fluid loss is through the kidneys, the formation of urine, and this accounts for 1,500 ml per day, and evaporation from the skin, and this accounts for 600 ml per day. And also the exhalation from the lung, because when we inhale gases or when we inhale air, the mucosa will moisten that gas. So this is one way of water loss from the body, the evaporation due to the moistening of the inhaled air, and this accounts for 300 ml of water per day. And a very small amount is lost in feces or in fecal material, and this represents about 100 ml of water. As I said, there should be water balance or water steady state, where the water gain should be equal to the water loss. The water gain through food and drink 2.2 liters per day, and from water produced from metabolism, which is 0.3 liters per day. So we have an intake of 2.2 plus a metabolic production of water 0.3, so it is about 2.5 liters per day. Water loss or water output: evaporation from the skin and the mucous membrane of the respiratory tract accounts for 0.9 liters per day, 1.5 liters per day in urine, and 0.1 liter per day in fecal material. If we make the total, it is 2.5 liters per day. So 2.5 liters of water gained is equal to the 2.5 liter of water that is lost via different mechanism. So water gain per day: ingestion of liquid and moist food between 2.2 to 2.3 liters per day, and the metabolic synthesis of water about 0.3 liters per day. And water loss per day is the insensible water loss by evaporation through the skin and exhalation through the lungs, and this accounts for about 0.9 liters. And then 0.1 liters in fecal material and 1.5 liters as urine. Fluid intake and output are usually balanced on a daily basis, despite the fact that the intake of water and electrolytes are rarely proportional. So the kidneys excrete excess water through dilute urine or excess electrolytes through concentrated urine. So if the water and electrolyte intake is variable, and our kidneys will adjust that. So if we have excess water, we will excrete more of dilute urine, and if we have excess of electrolytes that we ingested in our drinks or meals, the urine will get rid of that excess electrolytes in the form of concentrated urine. Both water gain and water loss are regulated. Let's talk about the regulation of water gain. A number of feedback mechanisms contribute to balance our daily fluid input and output. Rate of formation of metabolic water is not regulated, so that 0.3 liters per day cannot be regulated. So what is regulated is the ingestion. So water gain is regulated mainly by drinking through thirst mechanism. When water loss is greater than water gain, dehydration will happen, and this dehydration means we have less volume of water in our body fluids, and this will increase the osmolarity of the body fluids, and both will stimulate the thirst center. So if we have dehydration, there is decreased flow of saliva. This will lead to dry mouth and dry pharynx. Both will stimulate the thirst center in the hypothalamus. Again, dehydration will increase the blood osmolarity, and this increased osmolarity will stimulate osmoreceptors in the hypothalamus, which in turn will stimulate the thirst center in the hypothalamus. Also, decreased blood volume will decrease the blood pressure, and this in turn will increase the release of renin from the juxtaglomerular apparatus of the kidney, and this will lead to increased angiotensin II formation. Again, this will stimulate the thirst center in the hypothalamus. Stimulation of thirst center in the hypothalamus will increase thirst, and this will lead to increased water intake, which in turn will increase body water to normal level and relieve dehydration, and also decrease the osmolarity back, or the osmolarity of body fluids back to normal. The regulation of body water and solute loss happens through elimination of the excess water and solutes by the control of their loss in urine. The extent of urinary salt, and we mean sodium chloride loss, is the main factor that determines body fluid volume, because water follows these two solutes. So whenever the kidney removes these two solutes from the body into urine, water will follow by osmosis. Renal sodium and chloride reabsorption or excretion is regulated by three main hormones, and you will study these three hormones in more details in the cardiovascular system, in the urinary system, and again in the endocrine system. So what are these three hormones? Angiotensin II, aldosterone, and atrial natriuretic peptide or ANP. Angiotensin II and aldosterone promote urinary sodium and chloride reabsorption. So if the kidneys retain sodium chloride, it means they will retain water by osmosis, and this happens when there is dehydration. So these two hormones try to increase body fluid volumes back to normal. The ANP hormone that is released from the heart will promote the excretion of sodium and chloride into urine, and this will be followed by water by osmosis. So this hormone will remove water from the body, and this happens when there is a fluid overload in the body or increase in the blood volume, as you will study in more details in the cardiovascular system and the endocrine system. When we take a salty meal, which means an increase in the intake of sodium chloride, there is increase in the osmolarity of the extracellular fluid, and as I said, water will follow these two ions, so the blood volume will increase, and this will decrease the reabsorption of water by the kidney, so the kidney will get rid of sodium chloride and any excess of water. So what happens? Let's see this figure. Here we can see that increased intake of sodium chloride will increase the plasma concentration of sodium and chloride, which in turn will increase water retention by osmosis from the intracellular fluid to the interstitial fluid and then to the plasma. And eventually this will increase the blood volume. Increase in the blood volume will stretch the chambers of the heart, including the atria. Stretching the atria with high blood volume will cause the release of ANP hormone from the atria. ANP as a hormone will reduce or will circulate in the blood, will reach the kidneys, and will reduce the reabsorption of sodium chloride by the kidneys, which means there is an increase in the loss of sodium chloride in the urine, and this is natriuresis, and from which the name of the hormone was derived. The loss of these two ions in urine will be followed by loss of water via osmosis, and this will increase the amount of urine formed and eventually will decrease the blood volume. If we go to the other limb of this diagram, increase in the blood volume will decrease the release of hormone renin from the juxtaglomerular cells. There is a decrease in the formation of the hormone angiotensin II. This will increase the glomerular filtration rate, which means we lose more sodium and chloride and water in the renal tubules, and also decrease the release of aldosterone from the adrenal cortex. An increase in the GFR or glomerular filtration rate and a decrease in the release of aldosterone will lead to reduced reabsorption of sodium chloride by the kidneys, increase the loss of sodium chloride in urine, increase water loss, and finally decrease the blood volume. You will study this limb, the renin, the angiotensin II, and aldosterone in more details in the urinary system as well as in the cardiovascular system. Okay. In addition to the hormones that regulate sodium chloride, and we say these hormones are angiotensin II, aldosterone, and AMP released from the atria of the heart, there is another hormone that affects mainly water reabsorption in the kidneys. This hormone is called antidiuretic hormone. It is a hormone that plays a major role by directly regulating water loss in the collecting ducts of the kidney. Again, you'll study this hormone in more details in the endocrine system as well as in the urinary system. Antidiuretic hormone, that is also called vasopressin because it also causes the narrowing or the vasoconstriction of blood vessels. It is a hormone that is released from the posterior pituitary gland. It increases the permeability of the collecting ducts to water by promoting the insertion of aquaporin 2 channels into the principal cells. Principal cells are one type of epithelial cells that are present in the collecting ducts of the kidney. So if the hormone promotes the insertion of these aquaporin 2 channels in the cell membrane of principal cells, this will promote the reabsorption of water and lead to the formation or production of concentrated urine. So the final effect of this hormone is to retain water by the kidneys and the production of low amount of urine. There is a condition that is called water intoxication. So what is water intoxication? Excessive blood loss or excessive sweating or excessive fluid loss via vomiting or diarrhea, and that is coupled with intake of plain water without taking solutes, especially sodium and chloride. This will lead to decreased sodium concentration of the interstitial fluid and plasma, a condition that is called hyponatremia or low sodium in the extracellular fluid. We know very well that sodium is the main cation present in the extracellular fluid. Excessive loss of extracellular fluid that is replaced with just plain water that contains very low amount of sodium can lead to this condition that is called hyponatremia. This condition will decrease the osmolarity of the interstitial fluid and plasma and will lead to osmosis of water from the interstitial fluid into the intracellular fluid, because now the osmolarity of the intracellular fluid will be higher than the osmolarity of the extracellular fluid, including the interstitial fluid. So cells will swell, and this is called water intoxication. Swelling of the cells, especially cells contained in a fixed space like the brain, will lead to convulsion, coma, and in severe cases to death. That's all about this lecture. I hope that you got most of the concepts and most of the knowledge. I will be very happy if you have any questions to send me those questions by email, and I will be happy to reply and answer your questions. Thank you very much, and see you in the next lecture.